Hi everybody, my name is Sean Sennett and this is David Bridie, the man you've come to hear today. I'm very pleased David's with us today. I picked him up from the airport a couple of days ago and driving through that new tunnel, and I tried to put my windows up and for some reason the electric windows jammed, and then I realised that David's arm's stuck in it. So I'm very glad that he made it and he could play his gig last night. So welcome, David.
It was one of those, Sean, my arm's about to come off here.
So David and I kind of go back a way professionally. I think it was probably the late 80s when I first started working as a journalist, and it was a great time back then. There was sort of a lot of great Australian artists around as there is now, and record companies would call you up and say, we've got James Raine and Ian Moss and Jimmy Barnes and all these kind of people to interview. And they were very obviously popular artists on the radio, and they were interesting people to talk to. And there was a label called WEA, and they rang me and said, we've got this guy, David Bridie. And it was like a whole other world, because he was an artist that was incredibly brave and really pushing the boundaries. And if you cast your mind back, those of you that are old enough, in that period, the late 80s, you couldn't just go to YouTube and dial something up or download a track. If you developed an interest in an artist or their influences, you really had to dig deep and find other like-minded people who would turn you onto things. And you always had this great rush when you found something new. And I think David's one of those great artists that was influenced by people, created something brand new, and then really has had a massive impact on this culture in Australia. So it's a pleasure to talk to you, David. So I wanted to ask you sort of straight off the bat, you're from Melbourne, very clearly a Melbourneian. And I wanted to ask you, when did you first become interested in music?
I always had music around me when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Dad always, he was right into, Louis Armstrong and Benny Goodman and all that kind of. And he talked about going to see Louis Armstrong play at Festival Hall in Sydney, because he was brought up in Sydney, which was called the Tin Temple of Stoush, because I think they had boxing there on Saturday nights. But he talked about going to see Louis Armstrong the same way that, for me, going to gigs that I was really enthusiastic and really looking forward to, like when he was 19. So it was that, and we had piano. My grandmother had a piano, and we got that piano, and so I was always playing. If I look back on it, I don't think there's any one point where I said, hey, I want to become a musician. But I followed the idea of playing in bands and writing songs and really enjoying it so much and thinking that, if this was what I could do, what a great way to earn a living, spend your time, create. And I guess there was a point a few years into Not Drowning Waving, and when some film soundtrack stuff happened as well to balance out, that I thought, hey, this can work, and it did, yeah.
So obviously you were formally trained to play the piano.
Very bad classical pianist. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, not good.
And I was wondering, I guess we're talking about the 1970s there. What sort of music were you listening to, like when you were a teenager at home?
Slade. Mm-hmm. Big fan of Noddy Holder. Gary Glitter was the first gig I saw with the La-Di-Dahs, and Ian Capel, who produced my first solo record, actually worked as an engineer on that record, so that was kind of talked about how they tuned all the guitars were tuned to fifths, so that that kind of classic Mark Bolan sort of sound that they got with that. My sister was into Dylan and Leonard Cohen and people like that, the Beatles obviously, and then the older I got, I was about 16, no, I was a bit young. I was young when punk happened, but it kind of kicked in for me from 78 onwards, so I didn't get that 75. I was a bit young.
So when people talk about your early work, for me, I can kind of see the punk aesthetic is the fact that you do it yourself, you make it happen. Mm. I guess that had a big impact on you.
Yeah, punk had a vitality to it. It was kicking against the pricks. It was standing out against, came out of, especially in the UK, came out of, Thatcher and that quite, there was a real gulf between the people making the music and the people who were pulling at the levers of society. There was, and so much great stuff came out of there, and it's not just the sort of the Pistols and that, but there was a whole lot of artists like Vinnie Riley, who was on, who played with the Durity column out of Manchester, and he was part of that factory scene, but that was like instrumental. Yeah. Textures and these records are just this odd little drum machine with this guitar. In fact, I saw Eden Mulholland the night before last, which I really liked, but he reminded me a bit of Vinnie Riley, which is not a bad thing in my book. But
So when people say to you, what we're not drowning, waving like, how do you describe it to them now with this sort of hindsight?
Not Drowning Waving formed out of this. Rampant Records had a bit to do with it. It was this label that was set in a house in Elstonwick. And Johnny Phillips and I had done some demos at La Trobe Uni at a studio that we could get for free. And so we did 2 songs, Moving Around and Home on My Own, and a bunch of different instrumental mucking arounds. And Rampant Records was this label that was set in a house in Elstonwick. And because I did this radio show on 3CR and then later Triple R, microphone technique. I just went down there one day and spoke to a guy named Bill Tolson, and Bill was great. It was like, he went through all the costings of getting it, of a 7-inch and a 12-inch and, 2-colour and 3-colour, and where to send it out. It was obviously a simpler music industry. But that independent scene, that was actually quite formative for me, because it was about the whole process of making a record from both the artistic and the cost side of it, which I think meant that we understood it, but we also did a lot of records through them. So, and I'm not sure whether Not Drowning Waving fitted into a scene, although, we were very much part of that Triple R, PBS, 3CR. Melbourne had 3 community radio stations that were pushing non-mainstream music, and again, in those days there was a massive gulf between, your mainstream and your indie. It was different.
So I guess with that much community radio support, a band like you could actually get your records in the shops and sell them at gigs, and that would pay for the next one. Is that how it worked?
It seemed to work. I mean, we were young and so enthusiastic, and everything mattered, and that like you are when you're doing that. And it was like, with some great people in Not Drowning Waving. First record we started with John Phillips, who was the guitarist, and it was just John and I, but then, expanded into, Russell Rowan, and Russell Bradley, the drummer. He was a designer, so he designed the album covers. And Tim was a sound engineer, and he was doing the film course, so he was doing films and projections. And so it was a bit of a creative hub, and there wasn't we were just doing what we wanted to do, and it all seemed to work, we didn't play our first gig until after the record came out, after Another Pond came out, and that seemed to work for us. But community radio station was the whole reason why Not Drowning Waving were able to get... the first gig we did was a really good crowd because the record had come out, and that sort of worked in our favour a bit. And it was a bit, it was... piano and textures and some kind of, percussive stuff and other sparse things, and it seemed to fit,
Yeah. Obviously, you're very well known as a solo artist, but you've worked with a lot of collectives over the years. How important is it for you to be surrounded by other artists when you're creating music and then touring it, being on the road, as opposed to being in a bubble and just being David Bridie solo person?
I'm really lucky that they had some great people to collaborate. John Phillips in Not Drowning Waving, and Helen Mountford in Chocolate Cake, and the engineers, Tim Cole and Simon Polinsky, Brett Doig, those people who you work with. And on film soundtracks, that's a collaboration too, because you're working with a director. The idea of bouncing ideas, and Phil Wales would be one too, the guitarist who sort of played on the solo record. And I actually think it's very important for an artist to have somebody who can tell them when they stink. And when you have a great person to collaborate with, who you can bounce ideas off collaboratively, but Phil can come up and say, "Hey, what did he say to me?" No, that wasn't Phil. It was Greg Patton who came up to me very quietly whilst we were writing songs for the last Chocolate Cake record, and he said, "That third line, that is so Jesse's Girl by Rick Springfield." And I just thought I'd tell you on the quiet that maybe you want to shift it.
What was the line, you remember?
It kind of had that, which is like the...
That sounds almost Dusty Springfield, yeah.
Yeah,
You don't want to play it for us, do you, with that grand piano there? Do you want to save that for later?
I could remember the... what was the... Actually, I'll...
All right, put him on the spot. Here we go.
She's got runs on the board. She got tickets to the show. And on family occasions she gets drunk and she sings. That's the Jesse's Girl on. She lets everyone smile. And there's something. She's got a blind spot in the corner of her eye. And the rear view mirror is cracked up and filthy dirty, can't see out of it most of the time. And he was right. It was, but Rick Springfield, I don't think got the plaudits he deserved.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David. Now, David, with Not Drowning Waving, did you have a vision as early as that of taking your music overseas to the world?
Overseas.
I know
it's a great word, isn't it? Australians are kind of, done gigs with bands, to 250 people in London and 250 people in Melbourne. But the value placed on the overseas gig in terms of Australian eyes is a lot.
Yeah. And
I always think, it's the same kind of thing. Having said that, music is it's an English-speaking concept. Australia has the number of people that it has, 21 million or whatever, and so being able to get your music out to other markets is important. Yeah, really important. You want to get your songs and your sounds heard by people who will like it and want to connect with them. So there's always that thing that you need to, just putting out records and playing gigs wasn't going to hold it in Australia, and I would have to be like a number of great musicians I know who really gave their heart and soul and their guts to music and then they got to mid-30s and they had kids, and they always, they're always kind of happy about it, but there's always a little bit of regret that the music industry couldn't sustain them. So I'm not sure I was conscious of it because I didn't when you're 20 you don't think ahead to stuff like that. But I've been very fortunate that I've been able to make a career living out of music and been involved with some wonderful projects and the collaborations you're talking about before. So it's...
So how did you come about with your initial deals overseas? Because I know that there was people that championed you over there, that's championed Brian Eno and those kind of people. And have you lost your water?
I don't think I got one.
This one. There you are.
Thank you.
How did those A&R people overseas first discover you?
We were. It's maybe a little bit why the Australia's take on overseas has a funny resonance with me, because Not Drowning Waving got... so we did all our records with Rampant. We did 4 albums in 4 years, which was a great thing about those independent days and controlling what you're doing. So 84, 85, 86, 87, we put out Another Pond, Little Desert, Cold in the Crackle, and Claim got delayed a year. But yeah, there was the Up in the Mountains, Sing Sing EP. And around Claim, we got... we were with Mighty Boy, and then we got signed to Reprise in the States.
Yeah.
And then Warner's in Australia signed us on the back of Warner's in America having signed us. So it was like... But it was good. Philip Mortlock was there, who's a really good, and
Yes.
Damien Trotter, who's now at Sony, and they were good music people. And
Yeah.
yeah. And you know, people go off to, you know, the Midhams and the music conferences like this. You know, Bill Tolson at Rampant would come
Yes.
back and give me reports, and it was like, you know, so the music conference is this is the place you go to make it happen, kind
Yeah.
of thing. So
Yeah.
I hope that's kind of happened for some people here. But
So it's interesting. There's a bit of a theory that, you know, all good bands have 5 years of making great albums, and then they break up. I think Asher would agree. The Clash did that, and I think the Sports and all these great bands. 5 years is kind of it. So you made your 4 albums in your 4 years. You've been together for a while. How hard was it to, you know, leave that band and move on to something else?
Not Shining Waving started in '83, and we broke up in '93. Although we
10 years. Yeah.
yeah, so that was all right. And Chocolate Cake started in '89, just as a side project. It was just hence the utterly ridiculous band title. But it was just going to be, we were just going to play at Madigan's on Sydney Road, this great venue that had piano and op-shop furniture, and it was just kind of like this big lounge room. And we did 4 residencies there just because Johnny Phillips was away somewhere. So Helen and I had written some songs in New Zealand, and we just kind of got some old schoolmates and my boss at the Department of Community Services, where I worked sort of 19 hours a week in the early days. And so that took off then, which made Not Drowning Waving dissipating probably easier for me.
Yeah.
But Not Drowning Waving it was kind of funny. If I look back on why Not Drowning Waving broke up, I think because we did those 4 records with Rampant, and then we did this big record in Wales with through Reprise with the Karen Berg A&R, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, championed the civil rights movement, as well as she signed you know, R.E.M. and New Order to Reprise, as well as the Chills and the Church. And she was a bit of a champion for us and for me, and Karen's sadly passed away now, but that was, I mean, it's great for your confidence, but also just to have this this avenue to go down. But the big expectations on doing this big record, it's sort of, the band kind of petered away after that. There's probably a lesson in that somewhere, but and I guess that Chocolate Cake was working really, really well.
Yeah.
And was quite easy. And Not Drowning Waving was big on technology and gear, and it kind of ended up being a little bit like a dinosaur, just to rehearse or to do a gig.
Right.
And Chocolate Cake was all founded on the basis that you could rehearse in your living room with no amps. It was just all acoustic, and it was kind of...
So I guess with technology now and, you know, the latest laptop, you could probably do Not Drowning Waving in your lounge room, couldn't you?
Yeah, although James, our percussionist, he had
okay.
like 97 conga drums. And the problem with having a conga player in your band is even the songs that don't need congas end up getting congas.
Yeah.
He had a bell tree, which I always thought was the most hippie bloody instrument, and we used to have to gaffer it up at gigs, so when he'd go like, it'd go... But actually, Jamie was a phenomenal skin percussion player, and when we did Tabaran up in Papua New Guinea, you know, adapted these kundu drums and garamut drums, and he was kind of all over that. So yeah.
So what was your writing process like back then? You know, changing from one band to the other. Was it you at the piano late at night, come out with songs? I know you like to collaborate and write with other people. Did you take an idea to the band and they'd embellish it? How does it work?
I mean, there was different process of different songs, but I actually find it really difficult to sit down and write a lyric with somebody else.
Yeah.
Or even write the first tunes. I kind of think it's better that one person comes up with the sketch, and because I want to do lyrics, that was my domain, and then take it to, you know, whether it be a John Phillips or a Helen Mountford or a Phil Wales or whoever, and that they can, you know, shake it pretty sort of, you know, ferociously. But there are some songs that come out of, you know, the band jamming in the rehearsal room when you're waiting for, you know, someone to turn up or whatever, and you're just faffing around. But I think that the germ, that that the chords and the melody and the basic lyric comes from just me on mine. But
Yes.
Again, having the truth serum, somebody who you really trust and who you feel really comfortable with, that you can talk about where to take it without any baggage accompanying.
Yes.
Is a vital part. Yeah.
So we're talking about Chocolate Cake, and if anybody's seen them, they are really one of the best bands in the country, and probably nice to hear a song now. Could you play something from any album, really? The last album, the first album?
So the first Chocolate Cake record came from my oldest daughter's mum. Comes from a place called Te Teko in New Zealand, near Whakatane. Te Teko is one of those towns that they call Texas because it's so small. But I was holed up in a shack there, and there was a whole lot of songs that came out of that place, including this one. She's walking the railroad, she's walking away. It stands all the sleep as the tracks start to join. Read off in the distance, at the end of the bridge, almost around fast outside of the lake. She's taking her girls away from the town. She's taking her girls away from the town. And they smiled when they told her, with Puritan grace, that you can't raise your children if you're living alone. And the webs in the window, and the flash on the ground, the ice and the cold in the furnace's dust. She's taking her girls away from the town. She's taking her girls away from the town. Now they're rowing the river away from the town, and they'll sit round fires on the side of the lake. And they sang as they sailed, and they stared at the sky, and the boat filled with water, but only so far. She's taking her girls away from the town. She's taking her girls away from the town. She's taking her girls away from the town.
Thanks, David. A really interesting thing about you as a person is when we talk about overseas, people tend to think of going to America to make a record, or going to England, or going to Europe, and there's some place a lot closer to home for you. You spent a lot of time and it had a big influence on you. Can you talk about your time in New Guinea and the impact it's had on you, I guess, personally and also as an artist?
We had a guy named Mark Worth who did projections for us in the early days with Not Drowning Waving, and Mark did a whole lot of similar kinds of things at the ballroom with the models and Dorian Gray and the Boys Next Door and there's another band that I'm trying to think of that he did a lot of stuff with Ollie Olsen as well. And Mark was born in Papua New Guinea. His father was in the Navy at Manus Island, and the naval base at Manus Island is now part of our Pacific solution to asylum seekers. Manus is an island in the north, and Mark was just really passionate about PNG. I think he was a surfer, and he was into music, and he was right in the Velvet Underground. He'd always find me these string bands, and he said, "This is PNG's Velvet Underground." Which, if you've ever been to Papua New Guinea, it's kind of an odd concept, but he was so right. There's these string bands from New Ireland, and they just get into that kind of simple, dirgy feel but it has this momentum that those great, it goes on, and those early Velvet songs have that kind of vibe to it. So Mark. I hadn't been overseas, so in '86 I went there on a holiday, and I'd also done some music he did a film called Di Wai Belong Ninigo, so I did the soundtrack to that before I'd even gone to PNG, but that was that got me listening to a whole lot of Papua New Guinean music. And then there was this band called Sunguma that came out of the art school in Port Moresby. They had a lead singer named Tony Subam who had this hit song with Indonesia, Leave My People Alone. So that was also my first introduction to the idea that Papua New Guinea is this free country, and just over the border on the western side, what's ostensibly the same people and culture is under a military rule from Indonesia. So, but Tony got busted at Port Moresby Airport. He had dreads and had the marijuana on him, and made the front page of the Post Courier. Sanguma were this fantastic band. They sort of I saw them at the venue in Melbourne, which was a classic big rock venue. And so this band playing this haunting PNG sounds, but they sort of had a contemporary take on it. And I interviewed a couple of those guys when I was at Triple R. And I thought they were this amazing band for this. Papua New Guinea had always fascinated me. I always had those atlases as a kid. And I always remember Papua New Guinea had death adders. I know North Queensland did, but the death adder fascinated me, this fat little snake that was always, as kids you always go, that's the most poisonous snake in the world. And I always thought it was great that, this maybe gets back to the overseas thing, I thought it was great that Australia had the most poisonous snake in the world, So went up there, Not Drowning Waving. On that first trip, I met some people in Rabaul, and Rabaul had this fascinating recording studio, and 2 recording studios. It was really vital. There's gigs on every night at the Seawall Club and the Hammermas, and all these kind of little, shacks and, concrete wall floor with cyclone wire fences just right on and that was the venue. And every night of the week there was a whole bunch of different bands, and 2 recording studios running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so Not Drowning Waving went up to do a record together with George Telek.
Did you meet George that first time you
I
went
met
there?
George the first time in '86. We had beer and chicken and rice on the beach at Pilla Pilla, and we got drunk and said, "Let's make a record together."
Yeah.
And piss talk as you do, and those kind of things. And I still work with George now, so that was a real blessing.
Now you've brought George Telek down here to play, and you've also taken him to the wider world as well. What is within you that you're so passionate you want to work with these people and expose their work to the wider world? Does something resonate with that culture? Obviously it does for you.
Oh, look, Australia has a massive history with Papua New Guinea. Most Australians here would have, their aunties or uncles may have worked there pre-independence in the banks or in the radio stations, or, land developers or whatever. Grandparents, great-grandparents would have fought there during the war. I mean, the theatre of war not just Kokoda, the whole of the New Guinea part, Wewak, Madang, Rabaul, Bougainville, Manus Island.
Yeah.
We have this phenomenal history. Australia's only colony. It was the mandated territory of New Guinea, part of, so it was in Australia up until 75 when it got independence. In fact, yesterday was its 37th anniversary of independence. And so I think it should be, it's got 1/3 of the world's languages. It's got, the people living on the same ground that their ancestors ever did this, and they speak the same language, and they sing the same songs, and they work the same gardens.
Yeah.
And, there's a pop music scene, there's this string band scene of guitars and ukuleles. It's this village-based, and there's all this custom music that goes back. And now there's, all the stuff that happens in nations like that, the settlement kids. There's a guy named Daddy G, based in the settlements in Moresby, and Ira Lecky Ingram, who's has made what I reckon is one of the most interesting Australian records that's coming out in a couple of months. Ira's from Gubba Gubba near Port Moresby, but he's also spent a lot of time in Australia, and he's an MPC player, so it's a bit dub, it's a bit kind of Massive Attack. There's a couple of hip-hop songs with this guy, Daddy G. This is Australia.
Yeah.
Mark Worth used to write letters to the Australian newspaper complaining about, trying to raise the issue of what's going on in Papua New Guinea and West Papua. And he used to say, for God's sake, Australia, just have a look at the map.
Yeah.
West Saibai Island, where Christine Arnoux comes from, is 5 minutes from Papua New Guinea.
Wow.
So it's... but for me, musically, I just lucked out, and I'm in being up there, and maybe it was reward for us in not drowning waving of when somebody said, the first record that we delivered to Reprise in America was the record we did in Papua New Guinea, and they couldn't release it. They said, no one in America knows where Papua New Guinea is.
Wow.
And it was kind of almost like we'd fucked up our trajectory by... but it seemed just the right thing to do, and I certainly don't have any...
So has politics and music always been a natural fit for you?
Everything's politics.
Yeah, okay.
Everything. Every take is not politics so much as it's everything's got a social value to it.
Yes.
And if you look out there, the great bands, the Clashes, the David Byrnes, the Dave Masons from the Reels and stuff, they took on the role of being a writer as a musician to, like all great artists, to, have some observation. And whether it's stridently kind of political thing about,
Yeah.
Nicaragua or whatever, or just to take on how we, the Reels did a great line on Australia's, bland, layers of suburbs and how they were kind of soulless. It's what you do. It's what you do. And I think that's one of the great things of being a musician, being an artist, is being, we sort of live in that we kind of satellite the world a little bit, and sort of and the most vital and important music and film and literature and arts is the stuff that has that take of what's going on, and that could be it could be anything. It could be a wry observation about a relationship. It could be
So when you decided to make a solo album, I think EMI would have been the first album.
Yeah.
As a solo artist.
Mm-hmm. I think.
What provoked that need to just have a David Bridie on the marquee as opposed to the bands? Was it just time for you?
Both Not Shining Waving and Chocolate Cake were big bands.
Yeah.
Like Chocolate Cake's still going, so so they were floated between 6 and 8, and that's a large ensemble. And it was just time. I didn't make my first solo record until I was 40, so I'm a bit younger than that, but. It was just time then, but I hadn't kind of needed to before then. I hadn't really had, with the bands and the film soundtrack stuff and the work up in PNG, it was kind of...
Did the parameters change for you, where it was like anything goes, you could do whatever you wanted to do? There was was there less rules imposed, I guess?
Yep, you didn't, it was, satisfying me. artistically, and but you had other collaborators, you know, the producers,
Yeah.
or the other musicians that you called in. But I just realised now, actually, you know, last night playing all new songs, I was as nervous as buggery. It was really weird. You know, I was thinking, boy, how long have I been doing this? It's just that thing of playing new songs, and I mean, the great thing about playing a song that you know you don't have to think about it, you can relax into it. But last night was but it really, doing this solo record now is the thing that you know, the film. You know, I could get a whole bunch of great film soundtracks and all these great gigs and stuff, but if I don't do this solo record, if I don't come up with the songs that I really want to come up with, or satisfy myself, or come up with something that at the end I feel is kind of valuable, all the other stuff will be not worth anything. So the solo kind of records, even though it's maybe not the thing I spend, I mean, yeah, depending on what time of year and where it is in relation to the record coming out, is how much time you spend, you know, playing it. But I realise that doing the solo record is the thing that means the most to me out of all the stuff that I do, and I do a bit of stuff. So.
Well, that seems like a good cue to ask you to play a new song for us. What would you like to play?
I'll play something so new that I need my cheat sheets. It's a new song called Shortest Day of the Year.
Terrific.
I was going to say it's kind of back and sparse because it's the easiest one to do piano and vocal wise, but I'm wanting this record to be very much a keyboard and vocal record with, and I just want to layer textures in the background, whether they be found sounds or guitar shimmers or an odd loop or things. Mayday, rain falls down for 16 straight days, and the oak floor lays rotten. The collapsed spot gives way. The old folk, they stay inside and they don't leave their rooms. You got no entertainment, you nothing to do. On the shortest day of the year, the sun it goes early, if it comes at all. If this is the shortest day of the year, best make every moment, can treasure it all. And you drink more whiskey, your dad drinks medicine. Mum asks the same questions over and over and over and over again. And this is the shortest day of the year, the sun it goes early, if it comes at all. If this is the shortest day of the year, make each moment count, cherish it all. Light is still, the trees are red, the days are slow, the night shades dead. Where there's no hope, there is no fear, and this the shortest time of year. She says, leaving. I say, that's fine. What the hell was I thinking? Was I out of my mind? If this is the shortest day of the year, the sun it goes early, if it comes at all. If this is the shortest day of the year, the greatest harmful, it's a slow moving day. If this is the shortest day of the year, the sun it goes early, if it comes at all. Of the year. Not sure how to end it yet, but.
Thanks, David. The interesting thing with David's career is, anybody that knows him or knows his work, there's you know, the band albums, the solo work, and obviously the charity work and the working with artists from other regions. The film work, you're a bit like, I've used this before talking to you, like a Woody Allen. When he's finishing a film and it's getting edited, he's finishing the script for the next film. So that film becomes ancient history to him, so he can think about the next piece of work. Whereas in this sort of rock and roll business, the model seems to be you spend a year making a record, you wait for somebody to pick it up, it comes out, it's ancient history, you tour it, and then you think about making the next record, and that sort of amazing cycle people had in the 60s is obliterated. But you've kept that cycle going. Is that important to your you know, creativity, just to keep moving?
Oh, look, it's a little bit necessity, but all the projects I do, I'm lucky. I really believe in them. They're great, sort of, whether it be the soundtrack stuff or the One Talk label or the records. And not being a mainstream act in Australia, it wasn't. You know, I needed to, you know.
Yeah.
But actually, Johnny and I were really keen on the idea of film music. Johnny didn't want to play gigs at all. He hated. He wasn't a fan of it, but I talked him round to it after the record came out. But he was quite happy to do. Let's just make records and that's it. So these are the other things that I do are great creatively, but they also just go into the whole balance of things. You know, there are very few musicians who make a living out of music. In fact, at this conference, there's a hell of, you know, the people who make a career out of it, and I know how difficult it can be. You know, sometimes people I know have worked in, you know, record companies or publishing companies. It's not, you know, the companies grow thinner and they grow larger, and people get made redundant and all that kind of thing. But there are more careerists here of people who are coming and talking about music than there are of people playing music. I mean, and I see today, you know, there's so many bands, and it's a lot better situation than it was previously, in that, I don't know whether actually I do know that it is up here, but there's so many courses that have Macs and Pro Tools and, be a sound engineer, be a musician, learn how to do all this. And in grade 6 at my daughter's school, there are 7 Nirvana's bands that play at the school fete every year. The kids are really good at it too. They mope as well as anyone, and they kind of have this kind of grungy sound. But boy, as if you're a 13 or 14-year-old boy, and that's kind of interesting in itself, because there's girls are doing it, and boys, you're either playing football or you want to be in a band. There are so many bands.
Yeah.
And they're all good. They're really, really good. But boy, there's only the eye of the needle,
yes,
in terms of those that can kind of make it. So we're kind of selling the dream a bit.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we're selling a dream that we damn well all know is not going to happen for 95% of them.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't have gone... look, it helped in Not Drowning Weight. We did half of those early records, and again, get back to Vinnie Riley from the Durutti column, but it could have been... or there's the M Squared label in Sydney, Makers of the Deep Travel Fast, bands like that were doing this kind of analogue, glitchy kind of soundscapes.
Yeah.
And that was something that really interested me. Tim Cole and I had a radio program on Triple R called Deep Sea Music, and we played mainly instrumental music. It was late, 10 p.m. till 12 o'clock every Thursday, and we'd play these kind of textures, a bit of Frippatronics or Ros Band, playing these, hoses in a grain silo and then chucking spoken word over the top, and working with sound that way, which was evident in the early Not Drowning Waving records, and it's kind of on, I think, on especially Active Free Choice of the solo records. The point being that instrumental and textual music was used in, people who were the same age as I, making student films or making their first SBS doco and stuff, and when we worked together, and then as their careers took off, I kept doing soundtracks for especially people like David Caesar and Luigi Acquisto and that.
Just quickly, because I want to take some questions while I've still got some time left. Do you think as a culture Australians, appreciate, reward, accept older artists, people over 40? I mean, you see in America, somebody like James Taylor makes a new album of new material, goes to number 1. But, there's a lot of great artists from the 70s and 80s who made albums that, they're flat out getting distribution deals these days.
I mean, geez, there's a lot of festivals that run on older artists and do it really well. I mean, Blues Fest always has a great lineup. Last year I saw a rolling run of Grace Jones, Parliament from the side of stage, which is the way to see Parliament, to see the roller skates and it's a carnival. And then Elvis Costello and Gurumul, it was like 4 gigs in a row. The point being that there's, younger people go out more, they've got free time.
Yeah.
That's, it's a lifestyle thing, going to festivals, taking drugs and talking about the bands that you didn't see.
Yeah, sure.
Which is no different from what we did in those days. I mean, of course they bands are like currency there, it's like, are you it's like the old Sherbet Skyhawks, except it's probably a bit hipper now, but
Yeah.
You're into Boards to Canada, or into, whatever. But so the point being that it's always, it is a funny thing though. You hear it at a lot of these conferences. I'm sitting next to, is it Ben who's from Triple J, Finsley or something?
Nick.
Anyway, yesterday. Who seemed like a nice guy, thinks about it and stuff. But what we know what the kids want. So the kids, it's like, I think. This idea that it was so funny seeing the Who doing My Generation at the closing of the Olympics, and they didn't do the lyric "I hope I die before I get old." But I think now they cut that verse.
I'm hoping I'm old before I die. There's lyric now.
Yeah. But that's music's good. Whether boy, and how many bands sound like what their parents were listening to. It's interesting watching.
That's the strange thing.
Beards everywhere.
Yeah.
Beards around. I remember being 7 and having a discussion with my cousin Sue, who liked the Beatles better with beards than without. And I, at the age of 5 or 6, couldn't understand it. I thought,
Yeah.
But
Well, I guess we're almost out of time, and we should throw to the audience, see if there's any questions for David before we have to leave. Any questions for David Bridie? Must be somebody. Have we covered everything? They're a quiet bunch. Anybody? Any questions at all? His footy tips? Anything? Here's one up here. This gentleman. There's a microphone coming.
Hi, David. I was just wondering to get your thoughts on syncing in, for ads and movies.
I do a lot of film soundtracks and have sort of... actually, only recently, when I did The Straits, I was also choosing the music, syncing the already recorded songs that needed to be in that television program, which was great for the One Took label because there's a whole lot of artists in the Torres Strait and in Papua New Guinea whose music applied for that. I think it's a great way... I mean, when a song works with a movie or a TV series or something, it's got this real power. It's quite beautiful. It takes you someplace. Obviously, there's issues of when an artist writes a song is whether this is. It always shifts. It shifts markedly. Films, yeah. Look, all artists want to get their stuff played in films. A whole lot of Australian bands have survived by the fact that Mushroom Publishing placed their songs in Home and Away and Neighbours, which because they sold overseas were often the biggest part of a lot of artists' APRA checks. Ads is an interesting one. We licensed. I normally have been against it just mainly because I haven't had to go down that line. But there was a chocolate cake song, "The Romp," which was an instrumental that was used by a superannuation company, which we agreed to because we used the money from it to put on this big concert at the concert hall with Andrew Denton and Paul Mack, and Telek came down, and a whole lot of different people played it. And so we did book a record in this concert out of, it was one of those drunken conversations that allowed us to do that. We're saying, let's just do it and we'll put all the money here. Because it was a bit of a rationalisation, because it felt like you were compromising a bit by... But I can see what works. I mean, Left Field broke a really kind of lateral song with a Guinness ad that commercial radio wouldn't have played in a fit. Aligning your song with a product is fraught, but it's a lot. There's more money in it. I remember the Electric Pandas, and I remember after they did a Coke ad, I never heard from them again. I always thought that was kind of, and they were always the band that did the Coke ad. So you're playing with your the taste around your band, the image.
Yeah. Any other questions for David? This fellow here.
The wonderful Chipperoo down there, who I've done a lot of work with over the years, with Telek and with Sing Sing. October the 1st. It's a bit like studying for a exam or a essay. I've set myself the deadline, which is good. So I've got a studio at home now that I haven't had for 12 months because I moved house, and but that started up last week. Doing a great the first project I did was this guy named Bobby Randall, who wrote Brown Skin Baby, a great Australian song about the stolen generation. And Tim Cole was doing it, and so I put some piano down on that. It's got Frank Yammer singing on it, and Archie Roach, and Shelley Morris, and Uncle Bobby, and that was a really good way to open the studio. But the studio's there, the pump organ's happening, the piano's there, and so October, November.
Great, thanks everybody. We'll have to leave it there now. Thanks, David Bridie.
Thank you. Have a great conference.